Week 2 is underway, and we're trying to make those tough decisions for our fantasy rosters. So we have 5 morsels of fantasy interest for you, starting with the injury report. We always have to talk injuries very early into NFL season, and tight ends have taken a hammering this week. George Kittle is the headline on the IR due to that hamstring injury. I mean, as well as tight ends, San Francisco 49ers are in, I don't know who they're going to turn to other than CMC at this stage. Brock Purdy also out 2 to 5 weeks with turf toe. Javon Jennings unlikely to play due to a shoulder injury. We're recording this Friday evening, so anything has changed before then, please do check. Falcons, I mean, good news for Kyle Pitts, maybe. Mooney and London both limited on Thursday, so that is one to monitor. Brock Bowers has not practiced and still no clear news. No news is not good news when it comes to injuries in the NFL. The Raiders also don't play until Monday, so you might need to make a call to bench him early or risk getting you 0, or go and get yourself Michael Mayer, currently only 5% rostered. We're talking about some waiver wire pickups shortly, but Michael Mayer may be the player to have on your bench if you're waiting for a decision on Bowers. Evan Engram and Dallas Goedert both have injury concerns too. So as tight end seems decimated, we will be mentioning some streaming tight ends coming up soon. Xavier Worthy to be confirmed. I've just had notification on Sleep though. As we started recording, he is now swapped to doubtful from questionable. Doubtful means highly unlikely to be playing. Jalen Waddle expected to play following a shoulder injury. Bench him anyway. That's not really any important news for fantasy this week. And James Cook was a concern, but is apparently good to go. Ed, that is 1 minute, 40 seconds, the key injuries of the week. Have you got any difficult pivots to make before we move on?
No, very interesting what you say about San Francisco. They've been pretty decimated, haven't they? I think when it comes to the Falcons, from what I'm reading, I think they're both likely to play. But yeah, it's something to keep a close eye on.
As I said, tight ends are a struggle there. We will usually do some plug and play QBs, but this week I have for you some streaming tight ends to consider if you are struggling at tight end. So all of these players, their roster percentages have crept up throughout the whole of this week. I think each is going up about 3 or 4% just since yesterday. Javon Johnson, I mean, all of the targets last week, so he's obviously one to consider. And he has the 49ers. I say, other than CMC, the 49ers have not got a lot to keep them on offense, so he could see a lot of the ball again. Harold Fannin is the tight end rookie darling of this week after his performance for the Browns last week. You've got the Ravens. The Ravens have given up a lot in the secondary to wide receivers, but tend to be better against tight ends. So this might not be the week to go for him, but still you could possibly do worse. Hunter Henry, as the Dolphins. I mean, that says about all. We've been quite mean on the Dolphins this week. Hunter Henry could do you a job there. And Brenton Strange of the Jags has the Bengals. And we're going to say it several times over several shows this year. The Bengals love to help us with our fantasy points for our offensive players.
Outrageous.
I've got to pivot in a few places. I had a lot of George Kittle as he wasn't my guy. I've tended to go for a bit of Brenton Strange or Javon Johnson is where I've focused. Have you got to pick up any tight ends?
I've picked up Johnson in one league. Maybe we're not in that league together. But yeah, I've been all right. But yeah, I've got Kittle. I think I've got Kittle and Kelsey in one league. So Kelsey's just stepped up, and I'll move someone else into the flex spot.
So, yeah, if you've got injuries or you are a fantasy player who streams your tight ends anyway, there's at least one of those, probably two, are going to be available in most leagues at this stage still, I would say. But Ed, you're going to have a look beyond week 2 and some players we might want to get a jump start on the waiver wire this week.
Indeed. So a reminder, when we are looking at Beat the Waiver Wire, we're looking deep down that waiver wire list. In the main show, when we're looking at Fire from the Wire, we're looking at the hot properties, but we're looking a bit deeper. So with that situation in San Francisco, Jake Tongs is somebody you might want to look at. George Kittle on IR. So a chance for those other 49ers tight ends to step up to the plate. So you've got Tongs and Luke Farrell. They're the beneficiaries. And the 49ers have the Saints this week. As you can see, Tongs is just 9% rostered. and he's going to be receiving the ball from the mighty Mac Jones. So who knows what the possibilities could be for Jake Tongs. Could be someone if you're in a bit of a bind. If we move to look at Trey Tucker, Trey Tucker, he's a risky pick. Week 1 could have been a bit of a flash in the pan, but he did haul in a couple of receptions, including a touchdown. So he got a very respectable 13.4 points against the Patriots, and he is just 7% rostered. So if you're after a wide receiver, you could do worse, but maybe you're not quite that desperate yet. And then finally, if you are after a running back, DJ Giddens, he had a role for the Colts week 1, but mainly it seemed to be to give JT a rest. Giddens had 12 carries for 41 yards, more than expected, but again, a risky pick, especially as this week the Colts have the Broncos, who are a very intimidating defense. So 14% rostered, not sure if he's worth a pickup, but maybe if you're desperate.
Yeah, so in your deeper leagues, they're players to look at. And the players we look at this level, this stage of the season, are often the names that grow into be players that actually will become quite reliant on later in the season when injuries hit as well. We've focused very, very much on the offense, as is the obvious way for fantasy head, but defense is important too. If people are streaming their defenses, which is the best way to play defense, who should they be looking at this week?
Yeah, it's very difficult to identify the hot defenses at the start of the season as there's such a small sample size, and it's difficult to look for patterns, trends. So I think this week I've looked for opposing offenses who really struggled week 1. So the Cowboys are an interesting choice. They're 26% rostered, and they play the Giants this week, who looked absolutely hopeless in week 1 under Russell Wilson. The Cowboys roster percentage has shot up from about 2% this week at the start of the week because fantasy managers expect them to run up a big score. The Patriots are in a very similar situation. So the Patriots, solid week against the Raiders in week 1. They got 7 points, and they've got the Dolphins last week, who looked atrocious in week 1. Like the Cowboys, their roster percentage has shot up from kind of low single figures to that 27% this week. And I thought I'd throw in someone who's higher rostered, and that's the Rams. 67% rostered, but it's worth seeing if they're available. They look dangerous on defense, scored 12 points against the Texans last week, against the Titans and rookie Cam Ward this week. So expect them to be ferocious and put him under a lot of pressure this week.
When waivers open up to free agents on a Sunday, the most common move you see is people selecting their streaming defense on a Sunday, isn't it? So get it done early. We seem to ignore it compared to all the other positions, but can really make a difference. So if your league operates defenses, please do act now. Also, before we move on, please do take a moment to subscribe, like, and give us a share as well. We'll be dropping our Fantasy 5 show each week for 5 morsels of fancy goodness. And this week, we finish up with our DFS Red Hot Picks. We will be bringing you our Fantasy Game Day partnered Red Hot Picks show tomorrow. But just a little taster. One of the things we look at is the top game lines. The reason we look at the top game lines is because they create the most points and therefore the most fancy points as a byproduct as well. This week, the top game line is the Jags versus the Bengals. We said we're going to see the Bengals there a lot because of that defense questionability and then how just the firepower that they have on offense. Look at this. So Burrow, I think, should be a sound option this week. Ignore last week. Throw it out. A stack with Chase leaves you little room for maneuver. So you probably, though, might be tempted to stack Joe Burrow with T. Higgins. It's a decent price combination there, and that really could pay off. Chase Brown's workload was really, really interesting last year. It was exactly what you'd hoped for in the preseason, Ed. Makes him a decent consideration this week because he should bounce into the top 12. His price on Fantasy Game Day still does give a little bit of pause for thought. You've got to be confident with that you can make that money work elsewhere, but it's definitely an option. And he's not upon there, but as Noah Fant showed last week, a Bengals tight end can always pop up with a touchdown out of nowhere and pay off for you. So Gesicki or Fant could be a very low price gamble that pays off in DFS any given week. Certainly worth looking at this week. Other side of the ball, T-Law and Brian Thomas Jr., once again, I expect them to bounce back. You said last week, Ed, just how consistent Brian Thomas Jr. usually is, so I expect week one will be an anomaly when we look at those points over the season. I'm tempted by Travis Hunter at $3,800 as well, on £3,800. It just makes sense to me when you're looking at how he was evolved quite nicely. And once again, that touchdown ability in him, little bit pricier. Yes, the proportions are different, but still proportionately, he's a little bit more expensive on DraftKings. I think he could give you a nice return potentially against Bengals offense. Is he going to be an absolute top wide receiver? No, but he could repay that value. Travis Etienne, we said it last week, we'll say it again this week, still a very good price with Bigsby out of town. So I don't see any reason not to go for Travis Etienne at a price like that. I imagine I will get a lot of him. Finally, another player not on there, but a tight end again. Brenton Strange is only $2,200. Was involved in the workload quite a bit last week. And as we've said, tight ends can prosper against the Bengals. So he could be worth a pick to save you some money elsewhere. That is it, Ed. That is our 5 morsels of fancy goodness in just over 11 minutes. Anything you want to add before we leave?
Not at all. That was super quick and super informative.
Well, that should be our slogan from now on. That's it from us then. We'll be back tomorrow with our DFS Red Hot picks. But bada bing, bada bye. Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to the team from TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Twitter and Instagram.